All right. Make sure it is awesome. It is recording. Okay. Let's get started this evening. Well, like it says with chapter 4, covenants, commitments, and notices. Okay. We're going to be talking about 3 different areas: covenants, commitments, and notices tonight. There are going to be a lot of different things that we're going to be covering. Okay. Last night, if you were watching with last night's material, what we were dealing with the forms and how to complete them. Now, instead of us actually going and bouncing back and forth like we did last night, we're actually going to go through and talk about covenants, covenants, commitments, and notices. So we are going to be going through talking about these different elements as well. As you can see, the first bullet in this situation, we want to identify the provisions within paragraph 4 of the license holder disclosure. We're also going to look at paragraph 5, the earnest money of the 1 to 4 family. We'll also describe the purpose of option money and how to completely and correctly fill out it in paragraph 23, which is your termination option of the 1 to 4 family. We're also going to identify the provisions within paragraph 6, which is going to be the title policy and survey. And that's going to, of course, include notices 1 through 10, and identify the provisions within paragraph 7 of the property conditions of the 1 to 4 family residential contract. Now, one thing that we're going to do, like I said, y'all can disregard these little page 2 of supplement and all of that. We're going to talk about that as we're going through. But as you can see at the top, we're going to talk about the license holder, talk about paragraph 4 of the 1 to 4 family. Now, you'll notice, and there will be a little bit of me bouncing back and forth here. If you want to make it simple for yourself, if you want, print out a copy of the 1 to 4 family, you can kind of see where I'm going from, okay? But while I'm doing that, let me pull it up real quick. Right here. All right. Now, like I said, we talked about paragraph 1, 2, and 3 last night. Now, the next one that we're going to look at here is going to be right here in this paragraph, which never wants to stay. Of course, there we go. That, of course, not wanting to stay, but we're talking about paragraph 4 there. Now, it says, Texas law requires a Texas real estate or a real estate license holder who is a party to a transaction or acting on behalf of a spouse, parent, child, business entity in which the license holder owns more than 10%, or a trust for which the license holder acts as a trustee, or of which the license holder or the license holder's spouse, parent, child is a beneficiary, can notify the other party in writing before entering into a contract for sale, and you will disclose if applicable. So, for example, Mr. Eugene, say that you're a real estate agent, okay? And you are selling, say, for example, my property, okay? I'm not a license holder. I'm just a regular person. I'm your son. You are selling my property. You end up, when you submit a contract, any contract, you would be required in this provision, in this little line right here, right where it's blinking, you would be required to put something to the extent like this. Listing agent is related to the, seller. Or another way you could say it is listing agent is the father of the seller. Okay, so in these situations, you're going to have to disclose the relationship that you have. Okay, Colton, you go over and you're selling your mom's property, for example. You would change it as listing agent is the son of the seller.
So what if there's no relation?
If there is no relation, say that you're selling my property and we have no relation, then you're just going to do this right here. You're going to clean all that out.
Just put no relation.
You're just going to do that. NA. Okay? Because if there's no relationship, NA, you're good. Okay? But if you are related, or if not just related, you have business interest, you are owner of the business, you have to disclose it. Does that make sense? Okay? Now, in regards to, go back here, as you can see, it requires a licensee to disclose relationship to the party in the transaction. It is a requirement. It's not an option. You have to end up including it. Now, the amount of the decision. Now we're going to talk about paragraph 5. The amount in it is a decision of the parties. Okay, when we're talking earnest money, for example, Mr. Stahl again, you're purchasing, say, Keith's property. Okay, you're going to purchase Mr. Keith's property. What happens is when you are completing the contract, right here, Mr. Stahl may end up putting in here, I want to do $1 earnest money to, and this would be, I'm just giving an example, University Title Company at 123 Main Street, College Station, Texas, 77845, and 0 and 0. What you basically just code Mr. Keith here is, Mr. Keith, I am going to give you $1 as earnest money, and I'm going to deposit it with University Title, and that title company is going to be located at 123 Main Street. Okay? Now, Mr. Keith, I want to ask you a question, sir. How do you feel, Mr. Keith, about Mr. Stahl only giving you $1 to buy your $500,000 house?
Not very good about that.
You don't feel good about that at all. He's back here like, what? That's what he's doing back here. But what happens is in this situation is Mr. Keith can come back after he submits the contract. He can come back and say, no, Travis, I'm not accepting this dollar. I want 1% of the total sale of my house. Okay? And so in that situation that's what we're talking about. It's negotiable. So initially, a party may end up, the buyer most of the time is always drafting, the buyer may put in here a crazier amount, $1, $100, whatever. But somebody may come back and say, no, that's not acceptable. I want that to be 1%. And most of the time, it is 1% of the purchase price. Okay, most of the time. But there has been times that I ended up, it was just a friend buying a friend's house, like me and you in this situation. I'm buying your house. I don't want to put up a ton of money. We know each other. We know it's going to be easy sale. I need to put something in there. I put $1. Okay, I can do that. I can put $1. We're good. But if you're doing a transaction with a complete stranger, they're normally going to want 1% of the purchase price. Now, is it a requirement that it has to be 1%? No. Okay. Colton could end up, me and him could say, yeah, $1 fine. Travis, you and Keith may say $1 fine and y'all have no relationship. That's completely fine. There's no problem there. But again, in this situation it is basically, remember, this paragraph only shows a serious intent. Okay? Now the question is, and this could be challenged, Travis, is $1 really a serious intent to buy Keith's property? No. No, it's not. Okay? So in that situation, if you put $1 in there and you submit it, Keith's going to laugh at that and say 1% or no, nothing. We're not going to have this transaction. Okay? But the state will ask you, and they will on the test, they'll ask you, do you actually have to have earnest money? Is it a requirement that you have to have earnest money? What do you think, Colton? No. Earnest money is not required. It is not required.
So you could put NA in there?
Yeah, you can put 0. The reason I keep using numbers in here is on zip forms for whatever program you use, they put a numerical field here, so you can't type in here. So you have to put a number.
Because basically that's just showing intent to buy the house.
That's correct. But I may end up, I may not want to put any money down. I had the cash in the bank, and I can send you a letter. I got the cash in the bank. I don't need to put any serious intent because I got my money. Here you go.
When we bought my brother's house, we put it down 1% for the earnest money, and then they moved the closing date forward on us and did a bunch of this stuff.
Yep.
And so we dropped the price. We were like, if we're gonna close early, we want this much off the price.
Yep.
But to counter that, we basically said we want this much off, bubble up our earnest money from 3,000 to 5,000 to
Right.
prove that we're still serious and we're going to go through with this. It's just that with the situation we were in, it was a little like
It was a very unique situation.
yeah, and so it was a situation where like we were very serious about it, and we were afraid that by dropping the price, they would think we're not serious or we're trying to scheme in some way. So we upped our earnest money. We'll give you more right now that you can keep if we back out to prove that we're gonna do this. So
Have you ever heard of? Well, you probably heard this too. Have you ever heard of put up or shut up? You ever heard that statement? That's what this means. You put it up or shut up, basically. When you use this, this is more of a tool to show my serious intent. Okay. Now, yes, Ms. Nobles, coming back to your question. Yes, this can be zero. It can look just like that. This would be blank. University title would be blank. Street would be blank. Everything just be NA 000. Yes, you can do that. But it comes back to the point is the parties have to agree. Okay, parties have to agree. Like I tell people, just FYI for everything. Anything you see a line in here, it's negotiable. It's negotiable. Anything that's in here is completely negotiable. Okay. A lot of times agents will come to me and say, well, what do I have to put in here for earnest money? Well, it really depends on where you're at. Bryan College Station area, if you're here, $1,000 normally will do. $1,000 is fine. You're in Houston, it's normally, if you don't do 1%, you're crazy. You go to Austin, it's normally 2%. Depends on where you're at. So you can end up, you may practice in a different part of the state, and it may be 1,000 here in Bryan College Station, but Fulton in your hometown, it may be 3%.
So that earnest money, does it go into like towards the house, or do you use that money?
No, it goes towards the house. So what happens is this money, as you can see here, within 3 days after the effective date, the buyer must deliver blank amount as earnest money to title. So once everybody signs, there's a check wrote, you go to that title company, you deposit it, and once you deposit it, that money is now held until that transaction closes or it terminates and the money is dispersed.
So for earnest money, let's say you're buying a $300,000 house here in College Station, and they're asking for $1,000 as earnest money. That would bring the house down to $299,000.
Exactly. Now the numbers up here in 2 are still going to say 300,000. Okay, but when we go down to HUD and we're running all of our closing stuff, they're going to deduct this from this. That makes sense. Okay, y'all too good?
Yeah, but I don't, he wasn't here for the 3 as far as what A, the cash, B.
You understand this part?
Oh, I was online.
You're online?
You were
He's
online?
Okay.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that. I'm sorry. Coach.
Yep.
That's good.
Okay, so in that situation, now, one other spot here that you see the spot right here in bold?
Yes.
Remember that we talked about the other day when we first had class? Extremely important. But you'll notice here, let's actually read this paragraph so everybody has an understanding. Within 3 days after the effective date, buyer must deliver blank as earnest money to University Title as escrow agent at 123 Main Street. Buyer shall deliver additional earnest money of blank to the escrow agent within blank days after the effective date of this contract. If the buyer fails to deliver the earnest money within the time required, the seller may terminate this contract or exercise seller's remedies under paragraph 15, or both, by providing notice to the buyer before the buyer delivers the earnest money. If the day or the last day to deliver the earnest money falls on a Saturday, Sunday, or a legal holiday, the time to deliver the earnest money is extended until the end of the next day that is not a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday. Time is of the essence for this paragraph. Okay, so what you have to do is if I sign a contract today, I sign a contract right now. When do I have to have earnest money? I sign a contract today. Mr. Stahl and Mr. Grossman, I don't want you to answer this. I sign a contract today. What day do I have to receipt this contract?
3 days.
Well, 3 days, but what day? What day of the week do I have to?
Tuesday.
Okay,
No, it's Monday.
well, let's count 3 days.
Monday.
Friday,
Monday,
Saturday,
Tuesday.
Sunday. So 3 days is a Sunday.
It's not 3 work days, it's 3 days.
It's 3 days. It's not a work day, it's calendar. Business calendar. So Friday, Saturday, Sunday. Well, do you think title's going to be open on a Sunday? No. What
To the
if,
next day.
let's say Monday is a legal holiday? You have to have it by what time? It has to be the time to deliver the earnest money is extended to the end of the next day that is not a Saturday, Sunday, or legal holiday.
So whatever the title company's open until 5 o'clock.
So if they open until 5 o'clock, you'll notice it does not say 5 o'clock here, but you got to get it there during their operating hours. Okay, so again, key point on this one, very important that you understand this, that if it falls on a Sunday or a Saturday, because for example, I've had this happen. It falls on a Saturday, and then it's Saturday, Sunday, Monday's a holiday. Or the best one I've had before was a Saturday, Sunday, and it was Christmas Eve and Christmas Day. Well, what happens? You get 4 days, even though it only says you get 3, you get that 5th day. You see how this works? Because if it falls on a Saturday, Saturday, Sunday doesn't count, and if there's Christmas Eve and Christmas Day, which are most of the time they're closed, it'd be that following, which is on the 26th. Okay? Now, is it wise for a real estate agent to wait till the 3rd day?
Nope.
Horrible. Mr. Grossman, you just did one today. How extremely difficult is it to receive a contract? I mean, how like rocket science is it, sir?
It's not, it's super easy.
What do you do, Mr. Grossman? Talk a little louder so they can hear online.
You take the contract and the forms, everything to the title company, and then they'll fill it out for you and receive the contract for you.
Takes about how long?
5 minutes.
That's it. Real quick, simple, easy, just like that. Okay? So in these situations, when we're going through this, we have to understand that with earnest money, we have a duty to get this there. Otherwise, like you said, and these are very key important points, y'all, is that you have to look that if the buyer fails to deliver the earnest money within the time required, seller may terminate this contract, that's their one option, or exercise their legal remedies under paragraph 15, or both.
You mean you can't hold that check till the very end?
Nope. You cannot. Another thing is, by the way, while I'm on this, great subject, great thing here. Colton, let me ask you a question, sir. So, Linda walks in, she gives me an options and earnest money check. Well, when she walks in, she has the checks wrote out to Justin Nobles or Nobles Realty Group. Can I accept those checks?
Nope.
Why not?
Because it's not written out to the seller.
It's not written out in this one for the earnest money. It's got to be written out to title.
Oh,
And the other one has to be written out to the seller, which is your right, okay? So in that situation here, you cannot ever, because clients always do this all the time, it's not anybody's fault, they just do this. They'll walk in and they're in a rush, and they'll come up to you, Colton, and they'll sign a check, and here you go, Colton, and walk away, and they leave. And you're busy doing a ton of other things, and you just grab it and you just go on. And you get down the title and you see, oh shoot, you made it out to me. I'm just going to make it easy. Instead of go hunt my client down, I'm going to go to the bank, cash it, take the money, and then I'm going to go do it that way. What just happened, Mr. Stahl, when he did that?
You kind of, I don't know what it's called, but you basically mixed your own,
Commingled.
commingled, yeah, your own funds with the business.
You took client funds and commingled with personal funds, which is a huge no-no. Okay. Same thing. I've had an agent. They had a client come up and just slide a check under the door. Client just wrote Nobles Realty Group, slid it under the door. I walk in, I see a check, I open it, I'm like, whose is this? This ain't mine. I never go cash a check unless I know who's it for. Because if I put that in my account, I get in a lot of trouble. Okay? So when you're dealing with this, and this is the first check you're going to get is going to be made out to the title company. Now, who picks the title company? Who picks the title company, Miss Linda?
The,
Be careful, it's a trick question.
I know, it's the, seller.
Mr.
No, the
Eugene, what do you
buyer, it's
think?
the buyer.
Buyer, what do you think?
Seller.
Seller, what do you think, Stefan? Which one? Buyer or seller?
I mean, seller.
Buyer.
Both.
It's both.
Well, that's why I said combine.
That's why I was seeing if you catch on to it. It's both. Remember, everything's negotiable. Of course, the buyer is going to fill this out because they're the ones, the buyer always drafts this form, not the seller. The buyer drafts this form. So what happens in this situation is whoever puts, so for example, say Colton, you put this in here and you send this over to Mr. Jacob. Okay? So in that situation, company phone's not been ringing. It's not ringing.
I know what to do.
In that situation, say that you, Colton, you sent it over to Keith, okay? Or Mr. Jacob, sorry, Mr. Jacob. Mr. Jacob gets this, and Mr. Jacob says, no, I don't like using university title. I have a vendetta or whatever. I don't want to use them. Mr. Jacob goes in and marks it out and says, I want Aggieland title, okay? You get it back and you say, I don't like Aggieland title. I have a vendetta. Well, what happens is you both have to come to a consensus. Now, if you want to make it easy for everybody, try to find out who actually was the title company when the seller sold. Because if you find out, say that, for example, that Mr. Jacob, the reason he was objecting to university title and wanting Aggieland is because Aggieland is where he bought the property for him, okay? In that situation is Aggieland would go here. Because what happens is Aggieland already has the file. They don't have to go do any work. They can issue title commitment like that to you. You see what I'm saying? So a lot of times it's best when you're dealing with those situations that you allow the seller to give you some feedback. I normally, most of the time, I'll ask the seller. I'll ask the listing agent, hey, Travis, I got a client that wants to purchase your property, your client's property. Who is their preferred title company? And you'll say, well, they purchased it at Aggieland. Okay, you want to do Aggieland? Yeah, Aggieland sounds good. Okay, so when we submit this and file it, within like 24 hours, you'll have your title commitment. Unlike if you go through university title, it may take a week before you get it. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, again, so that kind of gives you an overview of how that works in regards to this particular one. Now, again, as you see here in bullet 2, it's not a required element of the contract. You do not have to end up completing that part. It is an optional element. It does show a serious intent of the buyer and acts as liquidated damages in the event of default. Now, TREC Rule 535.146, basically maintaining the trust of the money, addresses proper handling. So this rule right here tells you what should happen. There is never an acceptable time for an agent to take money and put in their account and write a check. Here's a hypothetical that actually happened a while back when I was a real estate agent years ago, okay? When I first started as a real estate agent, a client called me and said, hey, we want to put an offer in on a house, okay? Don't want to lose it. We're in a time pressure. We've got to get this done. But I'm out of state, and I can't get you the money. The only way I can get you money is to mail you a check, and by the time that happens, it's past 3 days. I need to get this contract receipted. Can I wire you or your broker money, and your broker cut a check and send it? Mr. Stahl, what would you do in that situation?
No.
No.
That's commingling the funds again.
Okay. So you would say no on that one. That's fine. Mr. Grossman, what do you think?
I would do it, but you would have to get all of that in writing that, that you're going to be doing this and that they agreed.
So I have a no and I have a yes. Miss Linda?
I'm sorry.
Okay, that's fine. Mr. Eugene?
Probably yes, to a point. I mean, not gonna have a lawyer or something there present.
Okay, Mr. Coleman?
Yes, but like what he said, I'd have to have it all in writing and also the commitment that he's letting me do that.
Okay.
What was the question?
So here's the thing. Here's the thing here. Is understanding that situation that I want you to understand is there will be times that your clients will actually be out of state. They travel. I have one client, he travels out of the country. He's here for about a month and he's gone for 3 or 4 and comes back. He jumps back and forth. Okay? He's here for about a month, back to Germany. Here for a month, back to Germany. And he likes to buy houses, to buy them up. Okay? But the thing is when he's in Germany, he sends me a check. That thing ain't gonna be here within that 3-day time frame. Not gonna happen. Okay? You're all kind of right to a point. Every one of you are kind of right to a point. Okay? You have to make certain in these situations is that when you're dealing with these things, and the most important part here in this situation is you got to understand that if you're going to end up, if you're going to get money, number one, first thing that needs to happen is it needs to not be made out to you directly. Real estate agents can never get the check, period. Okay? It needs to be written and it can only go into your broker's escrow account, not your broker's operating account. Okay? So you got to ask your broker, do you have an escrow account? I used to have an escrow account because I used to deal with property management. If you deal with property management, you got to have an escrow account. Okay? If your broker does not have an escrow account, the best way to handle it is let your broker, first off, the main thing, if it was me, if I was in that situation, I would always ask is, do you have a family member that's here in the United States that could go write the check? Do you have somebody that's local that could get me a check? First off, exhaust all your remedies. Is there somebody, a friend, family member, somebody that can write a check? If it comes down to there's no exceptions, there's no other option, then what ends up happening in this situation is you need to, as a real estate agent, your duty is you need to go over and you need to end up talk to your agent or talk to your broker, and most of the time the broker will cut the check. I've done that before. I myself told my client, when will you be back? He's like, I'll be back in a month and a half. I said, I happen to just have a good closing. I got a little bit of cash. I'll go ahead, I'll front the money to you and go on and pay it out of my personal account. But when closing comes, I'm going to tack it on at closing. Now, if the deal falls apart, how much money do you think I'm going to lose if it falls apart?
Oh,
No. If I terminate it during options, I get all my earnest money back. Now, I'll lose my $100 for the option fee, but I'm still getting all my money back. No big deal. Okay? But in that situation is only a broker can do that. So Colton, let's say for example that Mr. Eugene back here, he's your investor. So you go around, you find houses, you find good deals, and you tell Mr. Eugene and he just writes checks, just cash. Okay? So you and him have a very good relationship. Okay? He basically helps you, you help him, that's how you all make money. Okay? The question for you is, would you ever or should you ever help Mr. Eugene out on writing an option check or an earnest money check? No. No matter how close you are. And let me ask you this. With a check, I can catch you, can I? What happens if Mr. Eugene says, hey, well, all right, man, I'm about to lose this deal if we don't work something out. How about you just go take some cash down the title? There won't be any trace, and we'll just go take cash down there and you're good. What do you think then?
Yeah.
But you can't catch cash.
Mhm.
But you can. The key thing is you're right. You can catch that information. They can go back and look. So in that situation, even if Mr. Eugene tries to like, hey, you're gonna lose out like $5,000, man. It's just a few $100 or maybe $1,000. You're gonna make $5,000, $10,000. Come on, man. No. And the simplest way is, like I said, if you talk to your broker, most brokerages, especially in this area, they're laid back. They're gonna work with you. We're gonna make the deal happen. But again, you don't want to pull some shady stuff because that's when you get to commingling, and we'll talk about that in another class. It just can be a nightmare for you. Yes, Mr. Schultz.
If it's something where, like you said, you can't get the, let's say, it's Eugene, he's out of town, so he can't get the money to us in 3 days, but he can get it to us in 10.
Yep.
Can I put 0 for the 3-day option, and then the additional money, put the earnest money, and put
You
additional
You
10
could.
days after or whatever?
You could. Let me pull that back up so everybody online sees that, what you were saying. Basically, what Mr. Stahl was saying is if you end up, if he was saying if Mr. Eugene can get it to you within 10 days instead of 3, yeah, you could put 0 here, university title, and then change this to say it's a $500,000 house, so we put 5,000, and you put 10. Yes, you could do that. Okay, but what I'm going to say here, if you do this, most agents, you're going to have to call them and explain the situation. Okay, because if I see something like this, I'm going to be like,
Excuse me?
what are you doing? Why? Like, this is a mess. Because here's the thing is, this is where you got to be careful, okay? If you do it like this, but you give yourself a 10-day option period, remember, everything starts off of the effective date, okay? So what happens in this situation? Technically, there's no money down for serious intent. So Colton may go through inspections and everything, find out, oh, yeah, Mr. Eugene don't want it, and Mr. Eugene bags out. There's no earnest money. It's a big old mess. You see how there's a problem?
Yeah.
Yes, Ms. Lynn.
Can I don't know why this thought came to my mind. Have you ever had it happen that somebody wrote a check and it bounced back?
Yes, I have. And if a check bounces when you submit this in, it is bad faith, and it can actually terminate the entire contract, and it triggers paragraph 15. So say that Mr. Darren, your client, gives you 2 checks. One check to the seller, one check to the to the title company. You go receipt the contract, and after 3 or 4 days, it bounces. It is now considered bad faith. It's a breach of contract, and it triggers paragraph 15. And now the seller can go after Darren. So Darren could lose the contract, or Darren in the situation could be sued for other breaches of the contract.
Darren, you better not do that to me.
So in that situation, yes, Ms. Linda,
No money.
yes, it can happen.
Yeah.
It can happen. And so you may be asking me, what exactly is paragraph 15? Let me explain paragraph 15 real quick. When we get to that, not today, paragraph 15 primarily is basically the remedies under which you can sue. So they can sue for specific performance where they force you to sell the property, or they can end up in the situation, they can end up suing for specific performance, or they can sue for other damages, okay? They can sue for other things that has caused them harm. So it is imperative when you're dealing with these deals that you understand that earnest money must end up being provided, and it has to be secured. Now, Ms. Linda, coming back to your situation, if you are worried about that, if you have a gut feeling that your client's going to do that, what's the best way to resolve it?
I would tell them to go get a money order or
Exactly.
go get cash.
Nope, can never take cash.
Can't take cash.
Title
Okay,
companies will not accept cash anymore. Used to, they did, but not anymore.
then money order
You have to get a
or
money order
cashier check.
or a cashier's check. Exactly. And now I'm going to tell you, you got to be careful with that, though. You got to be careful. Because, Ms. Linda, say, for example, that we're going to use 2 hypotheticals here. And these are just hypotheticals. I like to use a good, diverse group. Say that for every Caucasian person that comes in the office, you accept any checks, just basic personal checks. But say in the situation that Sam comes into the office and he's a Hispanic person, and he walks into the office, and you're like, oh, nope, cashier or check only like this, or cashier's check or money or only.
Can't do that.
Guess what?
It's discrimination.
You discriminate it, you can end up getting in a lot of trouble. Okay? If you're going to do it to one person,
Gotta do it to all.
you got to do it to all of them. Okay? So if you sit down and you've been accepting personal checks, and then all of a sudden you see somebody else of a different race or a different color, Again, and it doesn't even have to be race or color. It can be gender. You may accept it from all men, but when women come in, oh, their money ain't good. I want a cashier or cash or money order only. Still, it's discriminatory. Cannot do that. So whatever policies you put in place, you got to keep it across the board for everybody. Period. Okay. Now, again, if the parties agree to the earnest money, failure to deposit, right here, Miss Linda, constitutes a default under the contract. Okay. Now, let's jump over real quick to paragraph 23. Let's actually read this real quick and we'll go to 23. So, the buyer pays the seller a sum of money and the seller gives a buyer a number of days that the buyer can terminate for any reason. The purpose is for the buyer to do their due diligence. Now, the parties agree on a number of days. The option money must be delivered within 3 days of the effective date. And of course, time is of the essence. So let's jump over here. Let's scroll down to paragraph 23. And let's talk about 23. Okay. So when you first, after everybody has agreed to a contract, okay, after everybody's agreed to the terms, yes, we jumped the majority of it, but once everybody's agreed, so say for example in this situation that let's see here, that Mr. Jacob and Darren in this situation, these are going to be the people I'm going to use on this example. Mr. Jacob and Darren in this situation. Mr. Jacob is selling a house to Darren. Darren is purchasing the house. Darren would be the one that would end up writing the contract, so he would fill in all of these blanks. Okay? And Mr. Jacob signs. So what happens is, let's scroll down here just to right here. Darren, of course, would sign as the seller. Wait, I did say that, didn't I? Yeah. Darren was the seller. Darren's the seller. Mr. Jacob's the buyer. So Darren would sign here. Mr. Jacob would sign the buyer. But what happens is Mr. Jacob would sign first, okay? And then Darren would sign. Now, when Darren signs, he must fill in this date. This is the effective date. Okay, it's when everything counts from. Now, once everything is signed, like we just said, you're going to get 2 checks. One's going to be made out to the title company, and one's going to be made out to the seller. Okay, so Mr. Jacob would write a check to University Title, and then he would write a check to Darren. Okay, that's how it's going to be split here. Now, what happens is once it's all signed and everything's done, immediately the real estate agent, Colton, you're going to be the buyer's agent. You go and take all of these forms and the 2 checks. You're going to go to, no, he's not going to title company first. He's going first to do the option receipt. So if Darren is the seller.
Yes.
If Darren's the seller, Mr. Jacob's agent, which is Colton, has to end up go to the listing agent that's for Darren, which is Travis. See how this can get confusing real quick? Because I'm even getting confused as I'm going through this. All right, so Colton, you've got it all signed, everything, you got the 2 checks. The first place you're going is to Travis. And Travis, what is the first thing you're going to put when Colton comes to you in this blank right here, this blanket?
However much money the check is he's getting.
However much money. So if it was $100, you're going to put $100, and you're going to put the word check, unless it's a money order, you put money order, whatever it is, you type it in, and then you would say check number 254. We're just saying that's what it is. One thing that I want to point out right here, this right here, this spot, okay? Only the seller or the listing broker / agent may sign that blank right there that's blanking. So, Colton, say you walk into Travis's office here, come in the door, and when you walk in, the person sitting behind the desk is like a college student answering phones. Okay? Colton walks up, he says, here, I'm to receive a contract. Person signs it, sends it off. Travis, was that person the seller or the listing broker?
Nope.
No. That person does not have authority to sign this signature line. Okay? That basically means if Fulton got him to sign it, this contract has not been received. Okay? It's void. It's not even worth it.
That is broker / agent, right? For that.
That's correct. And
I
so,
could-
so say for example that's where I was going with.
Yeah.
Say that you're out of town. Say you're not in town. You're out of the country or whatever. You're gone. In that situation here's what happens. What happens if Mr. Grossman is in the office? Can he sign on your behalf? What'd you say? No? No? Miss Linda says yes. Mr. Eugene? No, he said no at first. What do you think, Travis?
I would think no, because it's not the actual listing agent.
Okay, Stephen, what do you think? Yes, he
Because
can.
he's an agent.
Oh,
Because,
he's the agent of the broker.
because
Yes,
if
he's
you
the
notice
agent of the
here,
broker or the
it
firm.
says listing broker, and anybody that's sponsored by me is an arm of me.
Yeah. That's
So anybody in the office that is a agent can sign on behalf of you. So what he would do is he would put Stephen Grossman / care of Travis Stahl. Do you see what I'm saying? And then he would put the date, and now it has been received. Yes, Ms. Linda.
Okay. Just, I guess to get in my mind, the $100 that you have up there.
Yes, ma'am.
Where do you reflect?
We're going to go to that in just a second.
Oh, okay, go
Mhm.
back.
We'll go to that in just a second.
Okay.
Now, after you got that all signed, where do you go next, Cole?
To the earnest money receipt.
Correct. And where's that at? Remember what we looked at earlier?
So,
The title company. So he's going to go after this has been signed. He's going to go to the title company. Okay. And the title company is going to complete the earnest money receipt and the contract receipt. These two boxes must be completed. Okay. So in this situation, like we said earlier, this blank right here on receipt, what would happen is we're playing with the stuff from above. You'd put $2,000, check number 255, earnest agent. If there's not one in particular, they would just put university title. They'll say whoever the person was. There's an email address or any of this stuff. They'll fill all of that out, and they'll replicate this part here down here as well. Okay, so whatever's up here will be replicated down here. Now, Miss Linda, telling you this because I want you to see this, because you do my transactions. When they complete this, a lot of times, title company will just put UTC on where university title spelled out. They'll just go UTC, they'll sign the name, and they leave everything else blank. UTC, receipt or date or receipt by, and leave it blank. While I have told you that's a big no-no, it's common practice.
And Crazy Me would call and say, can y'all send?
Yes, you would. I know you would call. That's what I'm telling you. So in that situation is, if they don't fill out this part, the only key, most important part is this part right here must be filled out. So the signature and date, and this part right here, as long as well as the receipt information needs to be completed, and this part right here for the contract receipt needs to be completed. Okay, those are the main ones. Now, it's lovely if they fill it all out, but there are some people, especially when it is busy season, I'm just going to tell y'all will get to a busy season in your life, I promise you.
It's been busy.
Real estate can end up in a situation where you're going in title company. I used to be there when I was an agent myself, and I am not kidding you. I walked into University Title, and there was a line, like you were checking out at Target or Walmart. I mean, there was a line. And the lady, there's only two ladies, and they're just like, and I mean, they're hustling to get you out the door. Okay? That's what ends up happening. You got to stay with it. So again, while we want them to be fully completed, you're not always going to get them fully completed. Okay? But as long as the signature's here, and a signature's here, and a signature's here, you're good. Okay,
Where do you find that $100 at on?
that's where we're going. Trying to get ahead of me here. Going back to paragraph 23. Mr. Stahl, you're gonna have to keep our line back there.
I'm trying.
Colton, I'm meaning to pay you to help keep her line back here.
Do I get salary for this?
No, exactly.
There's
So-
trying. They succeeded.
In this situation, now that comes back, Miss Linda keeps wondering, where's that $100? Where's that $100? All right, comes back here, Miss Linda, 23. Okay, we're gonna read it first. So termination option for a nominal consideration, the receipt of which is hereby acknowledged by the seller, and the buyer's agreement to pay the seller. That's where that $100 would go, right in that blank.
Okay.
Within 3 days after the effective date of this contract, seller grants the buyer the unrestricted right to terminate this contract by giving notice to the seller within blank days. Okay? After the effective date of this contract. You see why that effective date is important here? Okay? Notices under this paragraph must be given by 5 p.m. That is extremely important. Okay? Because guess what? That 5 p.m. used to never be there. It's to the end of the day. But they have now put a time frame. And you'll see it says local time where the property is located. Okay? So you got to be careful there. By the date that's specified. If no dollar amount is stated as the option fee, or if the buyer fails to pay the option fee to the seller within the time prescribed in this paragraph, this paragraph will not be part of the contract. And the buyer shall not have the unrestricted right to terminate this contract. If the buyer gives notice of termination within the time prescribed, the option fee will not be refunded. However, any earnest money will be refunded to the buyer. The option fee will or will not be credited to the sales price at closing. Again, time is of the essence for this paragraph, and strict compliance with the time for performance is required. Extremely, extremely important. Now, let me tell you why it's so important here. So let me give you this hypothetical. Let's go on and fill it in so that we can kind of see this. So Mr. Grossman, he's representing a client, and he ends up, he puts this in the contract. Okay? That's $100, 10 days, option will. Okay? That's what he fills in. And this is normal standard practice. Okay? The only thing is that some people on the days, most of the time will only give you 7. Some will give you 5. But the maximum for $100 is going to be 10. Okay? Now, what happens here is a lot of people get this, especially new agents, get this confused. They see 10 days. How many days do you think that they have to get the option receipt?
10 work days.
Well, I got 10 days to go get this received. I'll go get it over to my client in 10 days. 3 days. And one thing that you'll notice here, when you read through this contract, to this provision, I'm going to ask you, Colton, real quick. Does this say anything like the options money about if it falls on a Saturday or a Sunday? It doesn't. So what happens, Mr. Grossman, if you end up, you get the contract today, all right? And you're like, you know what? I'll just wait until the 3 days. I got till Monday. No, that is not, nowhere in here does it say that it is based off of Saturdays and Sundays or legal holidays, you're exempt. Meaning that, guess what? Here's the key thing. Here's the kicker. This is, oh no, you ready? This is the good thing. So while earnest money can be receipted 3 days with an extension till the following day, ready for the best part here? can you receipt a contract without option money? Mr. Stahl,
Not fully.
is not fully executed yet. Therefore, if Mr. Grossman waits until Monday, he's in breach of the option. But if he doesn't receipt it that Friday, technically the contract could be in breach. Yeah. So in that situation that's why I always, when I'm doing a contract, the key thing in these situations is there's a lot of little things like today. You can ask Mr. Grossman. Today I was in the office and they're like, hold on, everybody stop. I gotta stop and let me play this out real quick because I got two parts rolling right now. I got this part over here rolling on how I gotta get this going, and I got this part over on the left side, I gotta get it rolling. So I gotta play out this, and I gotta play out this to make certain that everything's working. And still, Mr. Grossman, this has not been resolved yet. Okay? So in that situation we have to make certain that as we're doing these things, you gotta make certain that your dates and your times are fully complete. Okay? So again, one of the biggest things is a lot of people put it off. I'm just going to give you best practices. Here's best practices. You ready? If you're going to receipt a contract, then that's saying if you receipt it today, you better tomorrow, you're not going out of town. Okay? An agent, I get this all the time. Agent says, well, I'm going out of town. Okay, well, when did you receipt your contract? I receipted it today. But you ain't going nowhere. Or you're going to go over and you're going to have another agent take control and make sure it's done. Because does this anywhere, Miss Linda, when we talk about time is of the essence, let's say that Mr. Colton wants to go back home for the weekend. Can Mr. Colton go back home if he's got a contract that has to be receipted
No,
on Sunday?
no, you better leave me his address because I'll come and get him if he does.
Oh, poor Colton. He's like this crazy woman. What happens in this situation is we have to make certain, this is why it's extremely important that there is a person staying on top of everything. Because the key point, and coming back to this, is if 23 is not fully completed, what happens here, if it's not done, your client loses the option. Your client loses the option. So if your client goes out there and your client, because Mr. Grossman, let's say you waited till Monday, you caused your client to lose the option, but guess what now, Mr. Grossman? Your client no longer has the contingency to bag out. I've had a situation, not personally in my brokerage, but I've had a situation from a student that I taught before that did that. They thought I have until the following Monday. And they went in the following Monday to receipt it. And of course, title will receipt anything. Okay, you just walk down there, they'll receipt it. But the other agent, when he sent over the stuff, the other agent was like, you don't get an option. You don't get to terminate it. What do you mean? You lost it. You didn't file within 3 days. Since you didn't file within 3 days, there is no option. But we went out of the contract because of structural damage, not our problem. That's why it's extremely important, guys and gals, that termination options must be done quickly. You screw this up, you screw up the entire contract for your client. And guess what? If this isn't done right, this isn't done, your client basically is guaranteed to lose earnest money. Now imagine that. Your client put down $5,000 in earnest money and you made a technical error and you ended up costing your client $5,000. Mr. Stahl, you gonna be happy if I lost $5,000 for you?
Nope.
No, you can come hunt me down.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? So very important in that situation. Okay? Now, title policies, paragraph 6A and 6B of the 1 to 4 family. Okay? The parties choose the title company. Now, RESPA prohibits the seller from requiring a specific title company as a condition for the sale. That comes back to what we talked about earlier. seller cannot say that I will not close unless I use this title company, period. Not acceptable. The title policy is a contract between who? The buyer and the title company. So if the seller dictates who the title company is going to be, then they're dictating the contractual relationship between a buyer and a title company, which is against the law. Okay? Title policy is subjected to 8 pre-printed exceptions in paragraph 6 of the contract and existing building and zoning ordinances. So if you jump back over here, go back up to 6, there's a lot. You'll notice that 6 covers a lot. We're not going to read verbatim 6. Okay, that's something that y'all can go home and read tonight. I know that y'all all want to go home and have reading homework. Whatever you normally put up here, Mr. Colton, you're most likely going to put down here. Does that make sense? So whatever you put here, you're going to put here.
And in what circumstance would that change?
Very rarely does it change if a person wants to use an attorney. So if a person wants to close the loan with an attorney, they may end up, in some situations, they may possibly put an attorney here. Now this one, of course, is pre-printed, so you'd have to have a custom form done. But the time I have seen this happen is somebody might actually make this an attorney. But truthfully, an attorney could be on both of these. Okay? In Texas, an attorney can close and a title company can close. But 90% of the time, it's a title company. That's why you're going to end up having this and this. Does that make sense? I would say about 0.5% chance will you see that happen. Make sense? Now, what normally happens, and of course, I'm going off the normal, okay, the business practices most of the time. The seller is going to pay for the title policy. Okay? This right here on 8 is dependent on the real estate brokerage that you're with. Some brokerages will tell you that they want you to end up checking box 1. My brokerage, I always want you to check box 2. And this is an expense to the buyer because it's amending the standards that are going to be printed based upon discrepancies, conflict, shortages of area. It's basically making things easier for everybody. But if it's in a subdivision, and the subdivision has been around for a long time, you can just check box 1. Okay? But again, this is normally how I fill mine out. Now, I want to make certain that I don't get too far ahead. Yeah, 6A and B. So I don't want to get too far ahead. So I'm going to stop there. Now, you'll notice though with B, within 20 days after the title company, they have to receive a copy of this contract. The seller shall furnish the buyer a commitment for title insurance. What happens is this title must end up getting the title commitment from the seller to the buyer within that time frame. And that's going to dictate any of those covenants, restrictions, and any other documents or exceptions. Okay? It is important as a real estate agent that you kind of read through it. Now, I will tell you, because I get to this myself, I kind of briefly read through my commitments, but 90% of the time, I don't read them unless the title company flags something. If there's an issue, title will flag it. Does that make sense? So if there's an issue, title will kick it back at you. If there's not an issue, they'll just send it out, and that just normally means it's good to go. Okay, they didn't find any issues. But there has to be a title commitment. So in that situation, be aware that they have to have those different situations. Now, I do want to go through and read this real quick. Let's read through B. Within 20 days after the title company receives a copy of this contract, seller shall furnish the buyer a commitment for title insurance. That's going to be your title commitment. And at buyer's expense, legible copies of any restrictive covenants and documents evidencing exceptions in the commitments, other than the standard printed exceptions. Seller authorizes the title company to deliver the commitment and exceptions documents to the buyer at the buyer's address shown basically down at the bottom of this contract. If the commitment and exception documents are not delivered to the buyer within the specified time, the time for delivery will automatically extend up to 15 days. Now, what's the problem with that? If it's up to 15 days, they already get 20 days. That's 35 days. What's the problem with that? We talked about this last night. How long does it normally take to close on a house?
30 days.
30 days. How do we have a problem here? 20 and 15 is 35 days.
Goes into the next month.
So, nope. Or
3 days.
3 days before the closing date.
So it's 23.
So you may end up having up to 27 days if it's a 30-day contract, because it's 3 days prior, okay? Whichever, of course, is earlier. Now, if the commitment and exception documents are not delivered within that time required, the buyer may terminate this contract and the earnest money be refunded to the buyer. There's another way out, okay? So, in that situation is, if you're on the buyer side, do you want them rushing title commitment? Hey, no, I don't. Because if something goes wrong, I want a way out of the contract. But if I'm representing the seller, do I want them to take their time? No. I want that document ASAP. Now. Okay. All right. Now, let's go back here. Not that one. There we go. Now, paragraph 6A, objection number 8, can be limited to only shortages in areas, like we just talked about, by one of the parties paying an additional fee to the title company. That was that one that I showed you that I always check. The sales contract calls for the seller, of course, to deliver the commitment for title insurance within 20 days after the title company has received a copy of the sales contract. The seller, of course, is going to request title company to do this for the seller. So the seller is not themselves going to go out there and do the entire search themselves. Okay, you're not a title abstractor. That's not your job, nor your client. So, had this happened before. Sellers asked me, walked in and said, well, I don't want to end up paying for a title. I don't want to pay for a title policy. I'm trying to keep my costs cheap. I'm trying to keep my costs cheap, man. You going to help me out here? And I know you know real estate. You got your crap. You know what you're doing, man. Can you go down there and do a title search for me? No, you never go down. Well, I know your broker can do it. He knows what he's doing. Send him down there. No, your broker does not do that. Colton, can you do your own title search, though? If you're buying a property, can you go do your own search? Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can go out down there all day long and do it yourself. But you do not, in any shape or form, you do not want to go and do it for another client. Now, here's a trick question. Me and you now go into business together, and we form Colton Noble's Realty Group or whatever, real estate investments. I'm not going to ask you, I'm going to ask them. Can Colton now go do title search for me? We got no yes.
No, because you poured over.
You say no, you say, what's your reasoning for yes?
No, because y'all are partners.
So one say partner. Stahl, what do you think?
I'm not sure. I would say maybe yes, because it's not so much for you as much as it's for the company he owns, so it's for himself.
If in the situation you're doing it, we're acting as a business, yes, he can go down because he's acting as a partner in a business. He's an owner. I'm an owner. Okay. But if I'm buying personal property for myself, even though we're business partners, he cannot go run it. That's correct. So that's one of the key things when we talk about these situations I tell people all the time is that you have to be very careful in these situations because there can be certain exceptions to the rule. There is a lot of people that as they get more knowledgeable in real estate, the very first thing they do is they run out and they start an LLC. And I tell them that's a wise choice because in that situation, Colton, let's say, for example, your mom and dad say they want to buy a property, they want to invest. Probably a wise choice to end up mom, dad, and you start a company and act within that company. Because in that situation, you can do anything because you are now within a business. But when you start doing things on your own or you're doing things on just their behalf, not in the business, it's a completely different story. Kind of like what Mr. Stahl, me and you talked about the other day. There's a reason sometimes that a business can be beneficial. Okay. But again, that's what it comes down to. So for example, with my company, one of the key things I did, I created myself along with my parents in the business. So in that situation, when I buy things, or if I need them to go run an errand or whatever, they can act on my behalf even though they don't have a real estate license. Okay? They can do certain things on my behalf under my business. But in the same situation is, if I'm representing them in their own purchase, if I'm not licensed, I can't do it. You kind of see where I'm going with that. Okay? All right. Next one. Title company delivers the commitment and copies of the restrictive covenants to the buyer at the address listed on 21 of the contract. And if we'll jump over here real quick, I'll just show you. 21, right down here at the bottom. I'm going to tell you, in real life, okay, if you decide not to come on with me, I'll tell you something, FYI for everybody. I'm giving you some advice that I normally would never share with an outside agent, but I'm sharing this with you because you're in the class, okay? How I handle my stuff. A lot of real estate agencies and brokerages do not advise their clients or their agents about this. 21 is an extremely important box, and people play this off all the time. I can't tell you how many times people play this off. And it's benefited my agents, benefited me. Okay? So, say for example, that Mr. Jarrett, he goes over and he ends up, he's representing the seller. And he's representing, say, Mr. Eugene in a transaction. So we'll put Eugene Nobles. And he goes in here and he puts 123 Main Street, because this is where they're moving to, and College Station, Texas, 77845. Mr. Eugene's number is 979-123-4567. His fax number is 123-456-4568. And his email is eugene.nobles@anymail.com. Okay? So he ends up, he puts all that information in there. So Jarek puts that in there. I represent the buyer. Okay? So I come in here as an experienced agent. I walk in and I'm representing Mr. Colton here. So I put in this situation, Justin S. Nobles, care of buyers (979-557-2289), 979-383-2199, admin@noblesrealtygroup.com. Colton, what happened here? What's the difference here, man?
There's no address.
There's no address, and what also do you see here? Who did I put was the buyer?
No.
I didn't put anybody. I've just put that me as the real estate broker or agent. I'm the responsibility of my buyer. That phone number is my office number. That fax number is my office fax. That email is my office fax. What did Jarek do over here?
Put all his personal stuff.
He gave me all the information on how I can contact Mr. Eugene when the transaction does what? Closes. So when this transaction's done, does Jarek still have a fiduciary duty to Mr. Eugene? No. Travis, what can I do after this once this transaction's done?
Snag.
I can go over there,
Yeah, you can.
call Mr. Eugene. Hey, Mr. Eugene, this is Justin Nobles. I was the other agent on this transaction. It was a pleasure doing business with you. You know, how are you liking your new property that you're in, sir? Well, I'm enjoying it. It's wonderful. Well, that's wonderful. Mr. Eugene, do you mind if I happen to come by and bring you a little congratulatory gift, sir? Oh, okay. Okay. And your address is still 123 Main Street, College Station. Is that correct, sir? Wonderful, sir. Great. Well, Mr. Eugene, I will be coming your way today, and I'm going to drop off a thing.
All right.
Miss Linda, what do I do with these right here? This number and all this? What do we normally do in our office?
We call
Data.
them, we email
Put them in the
them.
data entry in our CRM.
Yep.
Put that in our CRM there. Start marketing to them. Now, Mr. Colton, is Mr. Eugene probably going to buy a house anytime soon?
Maybe not.
No. But does he happen to have friends?
Mhm.
Yeah, and those friends might be needing what? A real estate agent. And if Mr. Eugene is getting all these calls from me, Mr. Eugene, do you think you're going to hear from Mr. Jarek at all after he got his check? Nope. Mr. Eugene ain't going to hear nothing from Jarek. Jarek got his money. He's out. So now all of a sudden, when Mr. Eugene, you end up, you need to go buy another house. What happens?
I'll be calling you
You're
on.
going to call me. Guys and gals, this part right here, 21, depending on which side you're on, you do not ever, if you're working with the seller or the buyer, you only end up, you fill it up just like that. If you're in my company, that I'm going to tell you, this is how it needs to be. Okay? But if you go to another company, I'm giving you a little tip. Here's a wonderful way. Because you don't end up in that situation, you don't want to go over and you don't want to turn in and give your client's information out. It's the worst thing you can do. The worst thing that you can end up doing is go over there and you end up give that information out at all. It is not going to be classified as a wise idea. Okay? Because you're just giving out your client's information. Okay?
But you can leave that blank if you want to, right? The other,
Now, of
Brokers or
course,
whatever.
so if I'm representing in this situation, I'm representing a buyer. I'm not going to know the seller's information.
right,
So in real life, if I'm submitting an offer to Jarek, this is how it's going to look when I submit an offer. But it's Jarek's responsibility to fill in this portion. Now, Miss Linda, yes, you're right. Sometimes the client, the seller's agent, may leave it blank. And if the client leaves it blank, they leave it blank. Okay, no big deal. I can't force them to fill it out.
right.
But there are some agents that will go in there and they'll fill that thing out and they will give you their client's information. And I mean, they'll spill all the beans.
Yep, they do.
And when they do, win-win for you, because I guarantee you, in my office, I have Miss Linda already informed that if you see that, you fill that entire thing into our CRM. But don't put anything while they're in contract. Once that contract's done, market the hell out to them. Let's get them. That's how you end up doing it. That's a business practice tip. Okay? Now, let's go back over here. Now we can move to the survey. When dealing with the survey, in paragraph 6 of the 1 to 4 family residential contract, in 6C1, the seller is to furnish the existing survey and a T47 affidavit. The parties negotiate the number of days after the effective date that both the affidavit and the survey must be delivered to the buyer. So let's jump back over here. One back to 6. Okay. When you come back up here, now we've dealt with B. We're moving here to C. So what happens is in normal practice, you would check that box, you would put 5, and then you would put buyer. Okay? So what I've just said is that if the seller does not, so the seller has to deliver to the buyer and title company the existing survey within 5 days. Okay? But if the seller fails to furnish the existing survey or affidavit within the time prescribed, the buyer shall obtain a new survey at seller's expense no later than 3 days prior to the closing date. There's no option up here in the first sentence that the buyer has to pay. The seller has to provide a new survey. No ifs, ands, buts about it. But if the after a survey's been provided, so if an existing survey or the affidavit is not acceptable to the title company or the buyer's lender, then the buyer shall obtain a new survey at the buyer's expense no later than 3 days after closing. So if, Colton, you're selling your house and you send me the survey with the T47 affidavit and I send it off to my lender, Mr. Grossman, and Mr. Grossman refuses it, now it's my charge because my lender declined the survey. It should not be punished to you. You did your job. My person I picked refused. Okay? But, Travis, question for you. Could the seller, though, still pay for it even if my lender declines it?
Yeah.
Yeah. They could. I could change that box, that last box there, to the seller. But this, the way I put it up here, is normal practice. Now, let me tell you, this happens a lot, especially if your agent is a part-time agent. That's one of the key things. I tell people this all the time. A lot of agents, especially either newbies or part-time agents, I see this a lot, they'll list a property, but they don't have the seller's disclosure or the T47. What ends up happening is list the property so they get the first property out. Then they end up, they get a contract and they just fill through this real quick. And then they get busy because they're working a full-time job or whatever, and they forget about the survey after 5 days. Well, if you don't receive it within 5 days, say, for example, Mr. Grossman, you end up, say that you work part-time real estate, you work a 40-hour job, you work real estate part-time, and you end up, I send you a contract and say you're supposed to give me Miss Linda a survey and T47 within 5 days, and you forget about it. Do I, Mr. Stahl, need to call Mr. Grossman and ask him after 5 days for a new survey? No, what can I do? What's it tell me on there? I just go order one. And I go end up putting it at whose expense? Miss Linda, because she's the seller. So when we end up getting to closing, I got a new survey ordered. We get to closing, Miss Linda, you get the breakdown of cost, and you see $750 for a new survey. You can go to Stephen, hey, something's wrong here. Why? I had a survey. Why am I getting charged $750 for a survey? I don't know. I sent it over to him on the 7th day. He calls me. You didn't get it to me within 5 days. Sorry. Can't help you there.
I ain't gonna use you no more.
That's right. So again, you have to end up, I do not have a duty to contact Stephen and say, hey man, where's my survey? Where's my survey? No, I don't have to do it. If he don't give me the survey, then I just go buy one and do you think I'm gonna go find the cheapest survey person?
No.
Heck no. Hey Travis, man, how's it been, bro? Been a while, man, right? Hey, how much you charge nowadays for these surveys?
About $1,500.
Oh, hell yeah. Come on, man. You come on out here and do that survey. Stephen didn't do his job. You just come on out here, man. While you're at it, why don't you bump it up some more? We grab dinner tonight,
Sounds
man.
good. $3,000.
There you go. Is that illegal at all, Colton? No. No. The key thing here is that you have to stay on top of your dates. If you haven't got it for tonight, you got to stay on them dates. You don't stay on them dates, it don't count.
That's why you use your smartphones.
So you got to use your smartphones. Now, the other two, C2 or 6C2 and 6C3 are just these here. Okay. Sometimes a person may just say, Stephen may actually ask Linda, say, Miss Linda, do you have a survey? And Miss Linda says, nope, I don't have a survey. I don't have one. Well, then what you do, what Stephen would end up doing is he would check this box and he would end up put 5 days in that. And when he's basically telling me, since I submitted the contract to him, he's telling me that within 5 days of the effective date, my buyer must obtain a new survey at my buyer's expense. So that's why just asking your client up front, hey, do you have a survey? If you don't, just tell me, and we'll just put it in there that the buyer needs paid. 6C3 is where the seller buys it. So basically the bottom two is if there's no survey, if the buyer's going to buy it, then the buyer needs to put it. If the seller's going to buy it, then the seller puts it. But I want to tell you, I already made it, I put an error right here. Because do you think you're going to get a survey in 5 days?
Heck no.
No. Guys, the last time I had to order a survey, it was 4 weeks. Did you hear me? 4 weeks. Mr. Colton, how long did I tell you that it takes for a closing on a property?
30 days.
30 days. What's 4 weeks? About 30 days, right? See a problem there?
Mm-hmm.
So, very important in this situation that you put in here, you make certain that you give yourself time. So whenever I hear that there's no survey, I'm going to go in here and I'm going to probably put 25, 30 days here. Okay? I'm going to put that in there just because the fact is I can't close without one. I'm going to tell you right now, you probably get a survey within 2 weeks. Okay? You're in June, July, August. You're lucky if you get it in 2 months. And that's paying a rush fee, by the way. Okay? It was not this past year, but in 2019, I had a transaction I was working on. Had to get a new survey. Called every surveying company in Bryan College Station. They all told me that they were about on a 3-month turnaround. 3 months. I called people out of Houston. I got a guy out of Houston for $2,500. He could get out in 4 weeks, and he was also going to charge a traveling fee. You got to do what you got to do sometimes. Okay. On average, a survey, $500. But during the summer, you need to run your numbers. That's why I always tell people you need to have them numbers. Okay. So it's very important in those situations that you have that in the back of your mind. Now, in regards to objections and paragraph D of the 1 to 4 family, the buyer has a limited time to make objections to the title commitment, the exception documents, and the survey. The blank in paragraph 6D can be used to protect the buyer if there are specific things she wants to do to the property that must be determined before closing. The seller has 15 days to cure any objections made by the contract, or the buyer will terminate unless the buyer waives those objections. So right here, another key point, right here in D, what I always put in here, this is standard, this is standard for me. I do residential and or rental usage. What I'm ending up doing in this situation is yes, say for example that Mr. Jacob may be buying a property for himself. He's buying a house for him and his wife and their children. But do you think Mr. Jacob's going to live there for just 1 or 2 years?
Nope.
No, he's probably going to stay there 5 or 10 years. Okay. Well, after 5 or 10 years, he may want to get a bigger house, but he may not want to sell his personal house. He may want to rent it out. I need to include that rental usage because he may move into a subdivision that does not allow rental usage. So in that situation is I'm putting a term in here that he can either use it for his own home or it can be rented. And over here, I'm giving 10 days after the buyer receives the commitment that the buyer can back out if they don't want to deal with this house. Okay? If they find out in the title commitment that there's issues, we may just want to pull out. Does that make sense? Okay? Very key in these situations here. Okay. In 7A, we're talking about inspections, okay? 7A gives the right to the buyer and their agent to access the property at reasonable times. Now, before I jump to 7 real quick, I want to kind of jump back over here real quick because I know we're running out of time. But I just want everybody to understand, when you see E here, E is just notices. And you'll notice here, look here. Look how many notices are in here. There's a ton of them. There's 10 notices. Okay? Now, the key thing in this situation when we're talking about title notices, the most important one that you're going to get tested with is this one right here. The most important one that you're going to get tested with is E1. You as an agent have an obligation to advise the buyer to obtain an abstract or have an attorney review the paperwork. Okay? That is a duty. Okay? But these next 10 are just notices. Now, on 7, okay? On 7, when we're looking at this, as it says up here, 7A gives the buyer the right to access the property at reasonable times. The buyer has the right to do inspections of the property, and the seller is to have utilities, what? Turned on and remain on until closing. Cannot tell you how many times I've dealt with sellers that want to be cheap, and they're like, well, we moved out of the property, we turned off all the utilities. Well, you just cost yourself some more money to turn them back on. Okay? Not my problem. Turn them on. They have to stay on because the inspector has to inspect the property. And I guarantee you, just as somebody that is getting and working on his inspector's license, I guarantee you, if you don't do an inspection or you turn it off, the inspector is not going to be able to test anything. And my thing, if I'm talking to you as an inspector, my thing is I'm going to tell you, Miss Linda, since they have everything off, I can't tell you if this house is good or not. So if it was my decision, I would extend out option and have them turn it on and have me come back out. But, Mr. Stahl, if I come back out, do you think I'm doing it for free?
Oh, no.
No. Do you think that first trip was free?
Oh.
No, Miss Nobles, you just got a double whammy. And Miss Nobles, guess what? Is going to be furious at Mr. Grossman for scheduling an inspection without knowing if utilities were on. Okay? So in that situation it is imperative that you know and you're aware of these different situations. Okay? Very imperative. Okay. So again, right here, what we're talking about, A, the access, inspections and utilities, they must be left on. Okay? It has to be required. Now, in regards to 7B, this is the seller's disclosure and a requirement of the Texas Property Code. Sellers can limit future liability with full disclosure. Paragraph 7B1 says the buyer received the disclosure prior to the signing of the contract. So, real quick, I want to check something and see. Yep, there it goes. I want to continue this and I'll go to it. 7B2 says the buyer will receive the disclosure after signing the contract and gives the buyer the right to terminate for 7 days after receiving the contract. 7B3 is for the sellers who do not have to provide the notice per law. So the property code gives 11 exemptions of the people who do not need to provide the disclosure. And the form, of course, is on their supplement, which we're not doing the supplement because I've got it right here for you. Okay? So I'm going to explain this form to you. If you are representing the seller, you want to have that box right there checked. The one I just checked right there. Okay? If you're representing the seller, I want the buyer to have ended up received notice. Meaning that when I sit down with you, Mr. Stahl, back there to list your property, when I first came out for a listing presentation, I had my seller's disclosure with me, as well as the T47, and I had you fill out all this stuff while I was sitting with you in our first interview. Okay? Because the fact is, is when we do a contract, I got all the documents that I can hand over to Colton, who's the buyer's agent, and they have now received the seller's disclosure. Okay, that's wonderful. But if I'm Colton and I'm representing a buyer, I want that one checked. And I'm going to give you about 5 days to get it to me. Because Mr. Colton is extremely intelligent. So in this situation, it says the buyer has not received its notice. Within 5 days after the effective date of this contract, seller shall deliver the notice to the buyer. If the buyer does not receive the notice, the buyer may terminate this contract at any time prior to closing. So right there. And get the earnest money back will be refunded to him. So if Colton, if I didn't get the stuff from you, Mr. Stahl, and I completely forget about the seller's disclosure, your buyer can back out at any time for any reason. Period. Mr. Stahl, how would you like that? We get all the way to closing. We're about to close. Colton walks in with his client, and they're like, yeah, we just don't want to buy this house anymore. We didn't get the seller's disclosure. Bye. How happy are you going to be with me, Travis?
So happy.
So happy with me, right? So ecstatic.
Now tell the truth.
Yeah, he's going to probably chew me up and down and beat me up and everything, right?
Fight you.
Yeah, you're going to cut me down, right? Okay. So again, you got to get that form to him. Now, if the seller does deliver, say Colton and I do get it to you within that 5 days, okay? So if I do deliver notice, buyer may terminate the contract for any reason within 7 days after the buyer receives the notice, or prior to closing, whichever occurs first, and the earnest money will be basically refunded. So what I just created right here on that last sentence there, Colton just created another option. Colton just created another options fee. So here's what I tell people sometimes in this situation. I do this. This is another little trick I do. I go over and we're going to flip script here. Colton's selling. Okay, I'm buyer's agent. Call Colton and say, hey man, I'm going to submit a contract to you. I'm going to send it over, but I need it back to me pretty quick. Well, I just listed this property. I know, man, we got a lot of stuff going on. I'm going to send it on over to you. We're not even going to have an option fee. I'm not going to have an option contract on this. So I leave option blank. But I leave this part like that, just like it's showing on the screen. Colton goes through and he sits down with you, Miss Linda, and he says, Miss Linda, dang, we got one that doesn't even have an options contract. I'm going to accept this one. You should get this one, Miss Linda. You should accept it. Okay, I trust you. I trust you, Colton. You're the expert. I trust you. Sign. Colton ends up, he does the right thing. He gets me the deal within 5 days. Get it within the 5 days. But what now do I have? My buyer has what? 7 days to terminate for any reason. There's my option contract. Did my clients have to pay $100? Not one dime. My clients get in the contract for free. So when I look on the MLS, and I'm going through the MLS, and I notice that attachments, there are no seller's disclosure attached, I know I most likely could probably run the contract like this. And I had to even pay $100 option. Okay? That's another route that you can end up using to turn around and walk away with. Okay? So you have to be very careful. That's why I say if you're on the buyer side, you want it like that. If you're on the seller side, you don't want that. If I'm representing a seller, that's what I want right there. I want it to look just like that. Now, if in some situations, and we're about to go through them, if there are an exception to the rule, say for example, that Mr. Keith, he inherited property because of a parent passed away. Well, if a parent passed away, Keith inherited the property. Did Keith know anything about the property? No, he may have not lived in there for 30 years. Okay? So in that particular situation is Keith cannot complete a seller's disclosure because he doesn't know nothing. Since he doesn't know nothing, he would have to check the bottom box. Okay? Now, Again, 7C is basically on the 1 to 4 family, and if the property was built prior to 1978, and I want you to write this down, it is extremely important. Mr. Stahl and Mr. Grossman, did they ever, on your test, did they ever ask you about lead-based paint?
Yes.
Yes.
Does that tell you something? And these tests are not the same. So that just tells you they're randomized questions and they both got that question, okay? If the property is built prior to 1978, HUD requires a disclosure notice to be given to the buyer regarding the lead-based paint, along with a booklet called Protect Your Family from Lead in Your Home, okay? Now let me explain something here. This is easy, but guess what they're actually going to put on your test? They're going to say, what day does a lead-based paint have to be required? What day? Well, here's the thing. What's going to happen is they're going to put January 1st, January 2nd, February 15th, or December 12th of 1978. Well, the key thing is it's going to be prior to, so it'd be January 1st. So anything prior to January 1st, 1978, that's what I want you to write down, is where you need to be aware of that date. Because anything prior to January 1st, 1978 has to have the lead-based paint disclosure, period. Okay? And that's just a statement that you'll see right here in C that's just basically put in there. There's no checking. You just have to do it. Okay?
I think mine was what year, prior to what year did you have to disclose it? But as opposed to being 78, 42,
Yep.
2009, whatever,
Yep.
it was 76, 78, 80, and 79.
Yep.
So they were all
Random years.
Yeah, they were right. Yeah, real close together.
Real close. Yep. Seller's disclosure of lead-based paint. Trek has an addendum for the seller to provide that notice. Okay, and we'll get to that, check that when we get to that point. The addendum must be signed by all parties and both brokers in the transaction. That's very important. I'll catch you there. Because most addendums, what have I told y'all ever since from the beginning? The contracts are only filled out by who? Only the seller and the buyer. Does the broker ever fill anything out? Never, never. So in this situation is, the addendum must be signed by all parties and both brokers. Now you ready for something here? Well, I'm going to ask you a question. Can you, if I sponsor you, can you sign that form? You're a part of me. Can you sign the form? Huh?
No.
You say no. Mr. Eugene? Yes. Ms. Linda?
I say yes.
Mr. Grossman? Says yes. Mr. Stahl?
Yes.
No.
That's done.
Cannot sign the form.
Because it requires the parties and the brokers,
The
right?
brokers are the only ones that can sign the document for that, not the agents. It is that serious that if a real estate agent signs it, it does not hold up. It actually has to be the broker that has to sign it. Again, the brokers must maintain a copy of the addendum for 3 years. 3 years. You have to keep that addendum. Okay? Extremely important that you know that date. Now, acceptance of the property condition. Paragraph 7 of the 1 to 4 family contract. The offer from the buyer is for the property in its as-is condition, unless otherwise negotiated in paragraph 7D2. Neither party is required to pay for any lender-required repairs per 7E, and all agree-upon repairs are to be completed by the closing date per 7F. So let me jump over here, okay? So right here, 7D, acceptance of the property. It is as is. When you submit a contract, I get clients, especially new agents, when they're starting out, they go through a property. Say that I'm walking through with Darren, for example. I'm walking through the property with Darren. We're going through it. Darren gets on his knees and he's over here looking at the walls, knocking on the stuff, and he's pulling up the carpet and going around, and he's making little notes of everything that he wants done to that property, and he's just writing all this stuff down, okay? Now, when he's done with all of that stuff, he has like a 2-page report of everything he wants the seller to fix. Mr. Stahl, do you put that entire 2 pages in box 7D2?
No.
Why do you not do that, sir? Why would you not submit a contract, an offer? Why would you not submit an offer to another agent with 2 pages worth of repairs?
They'll just go to the next one.
They're just going to go to the next one.
I won't even worry about that stuff. So.
If you want to scare off or lose the opportunity for your client to get their contract accepted, then you go over here and you check box 2 and you say, see attached repair request. You don't lose the deal? Do that. Because I guarantee you, you do that, they're going to go, yeah, right, throw it out. Okay? What you do is you delete out that and you check property as is. But hold on, Mr. Novak, why would you do that? Why Darren gave you 2 pages of repairs and they're justified. Why would Darren accept it as is? Because what did we just talk about earlier in this class? You have a what period after everybody signs? You got an option period. And during that option period, that's when you do your due diligence. You don't do it before. I had one client way back when I was doing real estate, practicing a lot myself. We show up at a showing, and he had already hired an inspector. And we walk in the property, and I'm like, who's this? Oh, this is my inspector. He's going to do a walkthrough, a pre-walkthrough, or pre-offer inspection. We ain't got time for an inspection. We're here for 15 minutes to look at the property. I don't have 3 hours to sit here for a pre-offer inspection. Not going to happen. Was not happy with me, but I was not going to do it. I was not going to sit at every single house. We had 5 houses we were going to go look at, and he went to do an inspection on all 5. And an inspection lasts 3 hours normally. I do not have 15 hours to go look at these houses, and you may or may not put a contract in. Not happening. Okay? So in that situation is that you accept it, you put the contract, the buyer accepts it as is in its current condition at this moment. But then you do your inspections and then you come back and negotiate. What I'm doing here is I'm locking them into contract. Now, if I happen to see a simple, for example, say my client walks in and they love the house and they're going to buy it no matter what, but they just want the kid's bedroom that's painted pink to be painted neutral white. Okay, I can put that there in 2. Something minor, no big deal. Okay, but again, you do not put a list of repairs here. You do that, you kill the deal on its face. I guarantee you will kill the deal on its face. Okay, do not do that. Accept the property as is. Now, a question they're going to ask you is on E. They will ask you a question. Who is responsible to fix any lender required repairs? And the answer to that is what, Mr. Stahl? Nobody.
Yeah.
Nobody. So if Mr. Keith goes over and he gets pre-approved for a loan, and he goes and inspections are done, and Mr. Keith goes over there and he does his inspections, and which I've had this happen before, dealt with another agent that was new, that didn't know. Ended up, I was a listing agent, buyer went over, buyer's agent and buyer showed up, did inspections, buyer's agent copied me, my client, their client, and guess what? The lender on the inspection report. When you send an inspection report to a lender, they are now required to review it. And if I send an inspection report to you, Mr. Colton, who you're giving money to Mr. Grossman, a ton of money, and you see there's a ton of things that need to be fixed, what are you wanting done? All of them. Want them all fixed. Everyone. Because I put money out there, I want them all fixed. Guess what? We ain't fixing them. But now since she did that, killed the whole deal. Killed him on space. Another thing is about inspections. See, I can be very nice, and I can also be, like, I have a very good working relationship with everybody. But you screw me once, it's only fair for me to screw you back, right? Ain't that how it works?
No.
Yes.
Yeah,
No.
absolutely.
In this field it is.
Yeah, I like
No.
it.
In
Okay.
business, yeah.
Cutthroat. I like it.
No.
So in this situation, Mr. Colton, all right, Mr. Colton, play one out with you real
We
quick.
will
You ready?
have a meeting tomorrow.
All right, Mr. Colton. So you end up, you're representing the buyer or the seller. All right. No, I'm gonna give you the buyer. You represent the buyer. You're going through here, you represent the buyer. I'm listing the property, and my client will not come off of any repairs. You submitted a contract, you've done inspections, you want 5,000 in repairs. Okay? I tell you, Colton, man, no offense, me and you good friends, but my seller's not gonna budge. They're not gonna budge. They're not gonna give you $5,000. I'm sorry. Well, that's sorry, piece of crap, blah, blah, blah. Colton, I'm just telling you, they're not gonna budge. So what do you think Colton does? I'm like, let's just do an amendment, terminate the contract, let's just move on. Let's just call it a day. So Colton goes over, he's furious, because he just got his tail chewed by his client, Miss Linda, back there. Miss Linda, and she's right, see?
Yeah, sounds like
So Miss Linda chewed you out. Well, you're upset, aren't you? Because you're upset because we're not able to do something. So he sends an email with the inspection report to me, along with the termination of the contract. Basically, you just flipped me off.
Yeah.
That's what you did. Okay? I get it. I see it. Now, guess what? I have to go in and have my seller amend their seller's disclosure to include all the inspection report that you just sent me. Because we're now legally noticed of all the errors. So now my seller has to go over and now report all of those issues in his seller's disclosure notice. And Mr. Eugene, if that happened, that means I get to go to you and say, well, we lost your contract. And by the way, because of this situation, now you got to change everything. You got to disclose all of this to the new people. So, in this business, y'all, that happens. So sometimes if you get an email and you see an email at the end with a termination and an inspection report, they're not just being friendly and saying, oh, here you go, Mr. Stahl, here's the deal. I just want you to see the problems. No, they're not doing that. They're sending it to you so that now your seller is notified and now has to disclose that, because you have to disclose anything that's wrong with the property.
When we did the first clients that wanted to buy,
Talk a little louder for them.
yeah, so the transaction I just sold a house. There was a couple of clients that came in, did inspection, and then terminated during the auction period, and then another couple clients that came through, and that transaction went all the way through. But the first ones, they did inspections. As far as we know, the house is basically in good condition. There's nothing wrong with it.
That's right.
Inspections came through, and then they terminated.
Yep.
And they just sent me an email that said, we'd like to terminate our contract. And I just asked, oh, what was the reason for this, just so you know.
Yep.
And they said, there's more repairs than we're willing to take on.
Yep.
Which I talked to my clients, they have just remodeled like the entire house, so there's nothing that as far as they know, there's not much that has to be done with anything.
Right.
And so I mentioned that to them, and I said, this is what they said. And the wife was like, well, can we see the paperwork then? Can we see the thing? And I was like, no, let's not. Because that was my first thought, is if something does come back that there's some sort of structural damage or foundation damage or whatever, you have to disclose that or fix it.
That's right.
And it's best just to leave it as it is.
That's right.
So it's not even, because maybe the next inspector, even if this one made a mistake and found something that wasn't there, I'd rather let that go to the wayside or have the next person not find it or whatever and just continue the transaction.
That's correct. And that's the key thing is, if they want to bag out, let them bag out. Let them go. Okay? Your seller is not entitled to the inspection report, period. They're not entitled. And the worst thing, like you said, Travis, if the worst thing you can do is say, Oh yeah, Mr. Grossman, send me the inspection report. I want to go through it. Because now you just basically told your client, well, I just screwed you in that situation. So if you ever see that, you never want to ask to see it, because what you're doing is you're opening up Pandora's box. And you don't want to do that.
Nobody's happy.
Okay? So I'm just telling you, in that situation, you're going to be very careful. Okay? Now, paragraph 7G advises the buyers to use an environmental addendum, which we're not going to go through on this one right now. We'll go through it another day. This is basically if you're in a wetlands, an environmental assessment area, or any type of endangered species. You have to complete it. But very rarely you have to worry about that. 7H is going to inform the buyer in the buyer's right to purchase a residential service policy and negotiate with the seller to pay for that policy. Now that one I do want to discuss real quick. Right down here on 7H, it's extremely important in that situation. You want to input in 7H, you want to put a balance. And normally right now it's $5.95. Now that changes almost every year. But that's about the average is $5.95. And what that is that primarily is the cost for a home warranty. They call it a residential service contract, but if you want to write a note, it is a home warranty. The reason this is important, okay, while it is optional, it is important that your client complete it, because what happens in this particular situation is if a client sells a house and does not give a home warranty and something breaks the day that the buyer moves in or even a month or two later, they can turn around and sue them because they should have disclosed that, okay? When you buy this home warranty, it provides coverage where your client only has to pay. So if a buyer purchases it, something breaks, the buyer only has to pay $75 to get it fixed. They don't have to pay for a brand new appliance or a brand new stove or whatever. Miss Linda, real quick, I've represented you and Mr. Eugene in multiple transactions. Has home warranties came beneficial to you?
Oh, yes.
How many times have you gotten appliances from them?
About 5 or 6 times.
And how much did you pay for them?
$75.
That's right. And are they cheap appliances?
No.
Uh-huh.
They're close to about $5,000 on some of them.
Is that right?
That is
Yes.
correct. So in that situation, a home warranty in this situation, previously before me doing real estate, I remember me and my dad having to break things apart to take the wash machine apart and try to figure it out. When if they had a home warranty, $75 get a new wash machine, name brand.
7
And
days
that's
a
just
week.
it, $5.95 is.
That's for a yearly. It's a yearly subscription.
And
Sounds worth it to
$75
me.
to come out.
Mr. Eugene?
Now, if they were cash, you wouldn't have to really worry about that.
No. You always want to put
Then.
this in here. The reason you want to put that in there is because if the buyer gets in and something breaks,
Okay.
you're protected as a seller.
No matter which way it goes, still
It's a benefit for both.
Right.
Because it limits liability on the seller,
Right.
but it also benefits the buyer,
Right.
if you see what I'm kind of saying in that situation. Okay?
And we also have pamphlets in office for that.
That is correct. We want to try to make certain in these situations that there's discussions, but this does end up limiting that issue. Okay? Now, another thing that we want to talk about in this situation, okay, is we want to end up, you'll also see that we are going to go through, let's move to the next one, acceptance, there we go, acceptance of the property condition. The disclosure of relationship with the residential service company, which is the RFC form, that's going to be the page in their booklet, makes it clear that any money from a RFC to a broker must be for the services provided to the company and not a referral fee, okay? So we have to make certain in these situations that any monies that are going to be provided are going to be for the services that are provided to the company and not a referral fee, okay? Now, when we're talking about brokerage fees, paragraph 8 makes it clear that broker fees are not in the contract, okay? So it makes it point clear that the brokerage fees are going to be part of the listing agreement, okay? Not part of any other agreement. It's got to be part of the listing. And the contract is strictly an agreement between the buyer and the seller. The broker's fee will be found in a listing agreement, buyer representation, and agreements between the brokers, such as the MLS or a separate written agreement. Okay? All right. Real quick before we call it a night, just want to explain, when we go through this, guys and gals, this is just part of it. Now, we have gone through and we have basically covered, let me see, we've covered 1, 2, 3, 4, approximately 5 pages of 10. We're technically halfway through the contract. I highly, highly recommend that you be reading through this. They are going to ask you, guys and gals, I guarantee you on your licensing exam, they're going to ask you, what does paragraph 8 cover in the 1 to 4 family? And you need to know that it covers broker's fees. You need to be aware of these things because they will go through and ask you those. While it may end up seeming like, oh, I got this, let me tell you, I'm trying to explain this to you because it's extremely important. On the national exam, 90% of the students that take my courses and do the prep course and all blow past the national exam. No problem. That's the hardest one. Blow past it easy. Where they get killed on is on this. Get this. The national exam has over, I think, 100. How many? Is it 100 and something? I can't remember how many.
Yeah.
It's 100 and something questions. 120 questions. The state exam is only about 40. My people that take these classes blow past that 120, no problem. And I mean, some of them run through it in like a couple hours, maybe an hour, hour and a half. Okay. But on the state, with the smallest 40, this is the one that I have people that have to repeat and repeat. Okay. The reason why is they don't read this 9 pages. Okay. You've got to know these dates. And when you do the prep course, I kind of help you with the dates. I give you a little reminder, like a little way to think of it. But you got to be able to read this contract. That's what I'm saying. This class, while you may sit there and be like, yeah, okay, I got this, no big deal. This is important. This part here, they're going to test you on it. They're going to hit you on it a lot. If you can read this contract, you can spit out these paragraphs, and you know what goes in there, you're good. My recommendation still stands that I recommend you do. Go through this contract, break it down by paragraph. So you do A, paragraph A. Go back up here. It's actually not going to be A. It's going to be paragraph 1. Like we said up here. Just like it says, paragraph 1, parties, colon. Just sum it up. What's in there? If there's going to be subsections like 2, where you have 2 property, we'll put 2 property. A, legal description of property. B, any things that are going to be improvements on that property. C, any of the accessories that go with those improvements. D, anything that's not going to end up going over and ending up being transferred. That's how you want to do it. Once you make your sheet, memorize the heck out of it, you'll be fine. Okay? All right. So let me stop the lecture for this evening. Let me stop my recording.